if we routinely do homework online, for example, rather than doing homework in books and having it marked, we could potentially use machine learning to tailor tutoring, or Easter school interventions, using machine learning, really understanding what children know and what they don't know, in order to make sure they're not wasting their time recovering stuff that they've actually got, boxed off in their brains already. So I think from the level of curriculum content and the retention of knowledge, there's a huge amount that could be done. I think one thing which, and you did just touch on it there is a bit of a mismatch of expectations between the EdTech sector and the MAT sector as customers. Is, you mentioned something about things that we might not even have imagined yet to be possible. And it's really hard for a MAT that works on a 12-month budgeting cycle to embrace something new that costs more, even if it might offer an unimagined benefit. What we've got to be able to do is establish pricing alongside imagining a different way of organising our back office support. So we're doing some work at the moment on reviewing our operating model and trying to come up with some different ways of ensuring that there is adequate administrative provision in our schools, so that our schools don't fall over and can continue to maintain their operational management, whilst also looking at what we can provide centrally, so that we're doing what I said at the start about increasing expertise. Now, if we had an offer that came to us that said, if we use this piece of technology differently, this is what you would be able to move to in terms of organisational structure in your schools, because you'd be able to manage these things remotely, these things on site, and we completely redefine the role, for example, of business or operational management in a school setting. That's really compelling, because as part of procuring a piece of IT, we would also be procuring the kind of change management that we would need in order to get us to a position where we could really leverage what it was we were buying. The risk with those things that are the sort of unimaginable benefits is that they don't come with any cost reduction anywhere, which means that therefore they're just an additional cost. So what we've always got to think about in a multi-academy trust is everything works in multiples of 30 grand. So for every 30 grand, I can have a lower main scale teacher. So for every amount extra of 30 grand, I've essentially got to delete a teaching role in my mind. So if you think about that in terms of, and I say teaching role, I think it's a useful challenge to EdTech companies to think about it in that kind of way. It may be that it's a different type of saving that we can make somewhere in our system, but nonetheless, we have to think about making those savings in order to be able to procure something which may be 100 times better than what we have, but it may just be an additional cost. So the challenge I would put back is there are those of us in the sector who are interested in, hungry for different types of approaches, but they have to come with a clear business case, which allows us to imagine how adopting something better than we currently have is going to leave us with a much more efficient structure, and therefore is fundamentally affordable and not just an additional cost.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. No, I agree. I think, ultimately, a business case has to be created. It's the same with, internally in any company as well, which is exactly what a MAT is really. Ultimately, there has to be a business case regarding why would you take that, and the output has to be something. In some ways, some of it has to be commercial.
Well, it does, and in the sense that we're not generating, we can't use that kind of investment to generate additional income. So our income is pretty flat, based on the number of pupils we've got. By and large, it stays broadly the same each year. So an investment that's going to increase our costs has to be offset by a reduction elsewhere. It can't be offset by an increase in income. So that's where our trade-offs have to sit within a publicly funded organisation, not through an idea that we invest now because it's going to give us an increased income return some way down the line. So that's why I see too many business cases, not just from tech businesses, but other providers to the sector, which talk about the benefits, you know, buy this and you'll get all these benefits that you don't currently get. That's absolutely, well, it's not completely of no use to me, but it's not in the end of use to me if I don't have a means of funding it. It just leaves me thinking, gosh, look at what I could have had. So there's a really important change management part of business cases, which, you know, if you're going to be providing me with something which makes me much more efficient, how do I actually drive that efficiency out of my business? You know, and we never have those conversations with EdTech businesses. We only talk about, here's this great new product I've got that's going to be so much better for students, you know, and give you all these additional services. Lovely, but hard to justify quite often.
So does this come back to that you would prefer a much more stronger partnership with some of these companies where they actually almost, I suppose, prove their efficiencies? So they sort of go, actually, we think we can drive X amount of efficiency by using the system. We will come in as part of the overall price and assure you your 20% reduction in cost or whatever it might be. Would that be much more? Would you prefer that?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, those kinds of payment on proof of a business model kinds of contracts are often quite difficult. I mean, having worked myself in the private sector and worked with local government, you know, there's very often a pushback towards the private sector business when, you know, you come up with a great business case that proves the point, and then the client says, yes, but, you know, and often the savings, and we're wrestling with this at the moment ourselves and looking at our changes to our operating model, the changes that we can drive out will save us money, they'll create efficiency, but they're very often fingers and toes of people. You know, they're 5% of this role and 20% of that role. So actually, can we monetize those savings? It's often quite hard to do that. So working with a partner who's genuinely able to help us to monetize the kind of savings that that we can see, but we can't quite turn into budgetary savings is an interesting prospect for us. Yeah. But I think it's really thinking holistically about things, and that's why working with MATs at the MAT level is so important. You know, many EdTech businesses are used to working at the school level, and more as trusts get larger, and I guess when you get to the sort of 15 plus kind of schools, that's where the corporate centre starts quite often to step into the corporate space. We do need people to be thinking holistically, but not just about the employment so the education information system side of things, but also at a corporate level, how does this whole thing hang together?
Yeah, absolutely.
And you know, I don't think it's that common.
No, I totally agree. I think people fixate purely on the tech that they've got rather than, again, how things sit together. You almost want a sort of single platform and where basically there's a single sort of sign in and data moves between all the different businesses where everybody's got an open API sort of, sorry, it's a bit sort of techie, but the idea is ultimately then you can plug in what you need regarding finance, HR and everything else, but it's still the data moves between them all.
I mean, in my mind, and you know, I am technologically literate, but not expert in any way. But in my mind, I've got two basic units. I've got an employee and I've got a student, pupil. And if I can enter information about my employee or my student once and know that that drives my finance systems, it drives my HR systems, it drives my academic information, drives everything that I need to understand from one of those two core units, and that is overlaid by my income that I get in and how I allocate my income out to those multiples of pupil or employee, which is a school or head office or whatever it is, departmental budget, then I know then that I can work from those two single units and, you know, stack up in whatever direction I want to go in. If I want to understand French teachers in secondary schools and information about the cost of running my GCSE French and whether or not children get great outcomes, and how that links with staff absence or not absence, or staff seniority, or training courses that those staff may be going on, or curriculum units that we're co-developing or not co-developing. I'm actually able to drill down in lots of different directions if we're clever about it. But at the moment, feels to me like quite a big gap. And I suppose I'm used to working from my private sector roots, even back in the late 90s, early 2000s, when we used to talk for the first time about knowledge. I don't know if you remember that. Everything was about, you know, knowledge managers and creating knowledge repositories and all of this. And we were very excited about the fact that, you know, we might be able to look at all the bids that had ever been produced for public sector organizations in Europe. You know, it felt like there was an idea at that point that we would be able to gather information and understand information in a much richer way than actually the market allows us to do. And I think the specialization of EdTech firms doesn't help us in that regard, because we do get those, as you mentioned, single track specialists who, you know, unless somebody in the sector is the organizing mind that allows us to bolt those different bits in a seamless way, we're always going to be in this world where it's really difficult to justify from a financial perspective why I would pay for this new, more expensive, more bells and whistles kind of system, which doesn't give me any means of identifying how I'm going to get to the cost saving that's going to drive my ability to pay for it.
No, absolutely. So I think that's a big challenge for people out there now. Whoever's listening, I think that there's a big challenge there to start building that single sort of singular platform approach, and to MIS and all the management information, sort of including HR, including finance, into one sort of solution. Yeah, I think it's brilliant. I think it's fantastic. And I guess in some ways it shows, I suppose, innovation. Even though I'm quite an advocate of pushing EdTech companies to be more innovative, but at the same time, it has to be based on a strong business case for the customer. You know, maybe do a bit of that future gazing, but then draw it back into, does this actually have a positive outcome in the sense of financial, probably more financial, or in pupil progress, but that's quite hard to prove at the beginning of a sale, I guess. But ultimately, definitely has to show some form of output, which Matt's are targets on their KPIs.
And I think the I guess other key thing then, as well as having this sort of more coherent system landscape, is that my experience is that really great systems often fail in the implementation, and there's sometimes an overestimation by EdTech businesses, and I guess it's because you're so close to your own technology and you know it so well, there's sometimes an overestimation of the skills and knowledge and capability of non-experts in our schools. So if you imagine in a normal size secondary school, you might have one network manager and they might be brilliant on infrastructure and really not at all expert on systems and system rollout, system implementation. They may not know about change management. They may not have a quality assurance brain that really wants to test out whether or not this great new system that you're procuring and cloud-based system and everything is going to work on a 20-year-old Wi-Fi infrastructure which falls over every time you sneeze. So, you know, there's some real, I think there's sometimes a real overestimation of the skills and knowledge that, and the sort of implementation expertise that we have within MATS to make systems really effective at the point of implementation. So offers proposals which recognize that and don't overestimate it. And then, and I'm sure none of your sector colleagues would ever do this, but kind of blame the customer for the implementation failure. I've seen that all too often, and I think that's a real shame. That's nothing to do with the quality of the system and everything to do with the mismatch of expectations between perhaps a slightly naive sector from a purchasing point of view and a slight overestimate on the part of the EdTech companies as to how capable maths may be in terms of implementation. I don't know if that's something that feels familiar, Nick, but that's my
100%. So true. It's unbelievable. I think it's interesting because I think, and again, some of these EdTech companies, they start off, from a good technical sort of idea, which is great, and that's what that's what is a good way of starting a potential business or starting to build a product. But the fact is, we all need to understand that everyone uses smartphones, and the implementation needs to be as easy as putting a product on a smartphone, with WalkMe's. So if you want to do a big process, then it actually takes you through step by step. But at the same time, the one thing I think why, and I know it's a previous company of mine, but why Sims did so well for a long time and why it's because it had these support teams that would help you push the button. There's lots of people who were unconfident. They may see a process and go, I know what I need to do, but actually if I press that button, then, do I get rid of this person's contract? I don't want to get rid of the person's contract. So in which case, then sometimes you have to have somebody that helps them sort of move themselves forward in that process and give them that level of confidence. And because I think you're right, I think majority of people in schools aren't that IT literate. Well, they're not as IT literate as an enterprise solution, and maybe a big business and so on. So I think that's really important.
There's a very funny Eddie Izzard sketch where he talks about how very few people are real technologically literate people, and that the majority of people either fall into the techno fear or the techno joy kind of category. They're either very gung-ho and oh, I've lost all the contracts kind of thing. Or they're very much kind of just going to press on, oh, if I press this, what's going to happen? And I think you see that in schools, mostly techno fear and occasionally techno joy, which is almost as damaging because, that can end up with taking you completely down the wrong route. It looks like a really good idea. And then we end up going too far down a single route that's impossible to extract ourselves from. So my sort of, I guess, warning or advice is let's not overestimate the skills or indeed exploit the sort of lack of skills and knowledge, because there's, I think, a real appetite in the sector to be more technologically literate. I think this time period has really given us a burning platform. Actually, we've needed quickly to become more technologically literate. But I think in some senses, we've built a little bit on shifting sands. Yeah. And so we've got to go back now and build some firm foundations and make sure that we don't just kind of go off down certain rabbit holes, but that we are being coherent and consistent in how we develop our IT infrastructure plans, strategies, and so on for the future.
And I think, the idea of getting this implementation in place is also shouldn't be something that you charge extra for, because that was, it feels like, the system is too complicated to basically be served. So I think that, or get the benefit from the actual solution. I think companies need to understand, if they build strong partnerships with MATs or schools, depending on which one that, depending who you're selling to, and you get it implemented and embedded in the actual into the establishment, do you know what, the likelihood of them keeping hold of it because they trust you, and the fact is they're getting the benefit and getting the output from that solution, means that you've got a that you don't have to worry about retention so much. You've got a customer potentially for, well, maybe not for life, but you've got a customer for a long period of time at least. The ones that basically just drop the product in and say, well, you can pay me a couple of grand if you want, and I'll help you implement it. You sort of go, well, it's your solution. Is it that bad? Is it that hard to implement? So we're
a very easy customer in the sector. You don't have to do too much to make us extremely happy. And when you have no knowledge, somebody with some more knowledge than you is a real true friend, and we want to hold on to them and nurture those relationships. So I think we're actually quite an easy customer. You don't have to go, I'd say, it's not an extra mile, it's an extra couple of 100 yards to make us feel really special and really nurtured. So I guess if that's a timely message for the sector, I do hope that colleagues across the sector do take that away, because we are hungry for being better than we are, and really keen to have partnerships which feel, maybe to you don't feel much like a massive over and above, but to us will feel really quite special. So, I'll put that there as a challenge, if you like.
Yeah, no, absolutely.